Well, hey out there, everybody. It's Bradford, your carnivore curmudgeon, and today we're going to take a look at something I made recently that was just whimsical, and that is a soft, moist, delicious carnivore Twinkie. Well, it's not really a Twinkie, it's just a tiny meatloaf that I stuffed with some cream cheese and cheddar that just sort of reminded me of a Twinkie. So, we're going to look at how I made this, and I'll tell you if I would make it again. And we'll also make a quick little secondary recipe. The key to this, though, is I started with this Marcho Farms meatloaf mix, ground veal, pork, and beef. I've had this before. I don't know what they do, but the ratio of those three meats makes a really nice, delicious meatloaf without a bunch of added stuff. And the recipe is actually quite simple. I started with that meatloaf and I took one egg. And when I learned a couple of years ago that when I add an egg to a hamburger mix or a meatloaf mix, I get better results if I scramble it up first, because if I just throw that egg in there, it seems like it never gets stirred up enough. It never really gets incorporated into the meat as well as when I scramble it and then just sort of pour it all over. And I'm also going to add some salt and some garlic powder and some minced onions, dried minced onions in this case, because I couldn't find my onion powder. But speaking of garlic and onion powder, I had a viewer who wrote on a different video, he didn't understand why I called it carnivore chili when it had spices in it, because spices are plants. And even though he wasn't carnivore himself, he wanted to know why I called it carnivore. Well, of course, I explained as nicely as I could that some people can handle spices and I can, and so they're generally accepted. But then he wrote back again and he wanted to argue that words mean things, and if I call it carnivore and it has spices in it, then it's not carnivore. So I explained to him that Lake Titicaca also isn't filled with boobs and poop, but since I don't swim there, I try my best not to let it bother me. So don't worry about it, Curtis. Okay, now back to our Twinkie recipe. So I did pour this scrambled egg all over the spiced up meat, and then you know the drill. Take some nice clean hands and mixy mix until it's all incorporated very nicely and a little bit sticky. And you can certainly do this in a full-size bread pan, but I had these tiny bread pans for something. I don't even know what I had them for. Haven't baked with them in years, had to actually dig all the way in the back of the cupboard to find them. And I greased this up with my favorite Wagyu fat so that it wouldn't stick to the pan. And then I filled it up about 75% of the way up the pan. I wanted to make sure that I had room for that fat that was going to render out of this. I got a feeling this meatloaf mix is probably the better portion of pork than it is the beef and the veal. It always gives off a lot of fat. But usually I make my meatloaves on a cookie tray freeform. So I wanted to just make sure that it had room for that additional fat. And since I had some meat left over, I decided to just make some, as my wife would call them, cute little meatballs. It seems like women really like cute food and cute dishes. Anyway, so I took about a half a cup of pork rinds, since I already had them ground up, and I thought, well, that might be tasty if I rolled them around in these pork rinds and make a nice crispy meatball with the stuff that won't fit in the pan. And I actually ended up making 2 batches of this, but we'll get to that. Now the oven, I'm going to put that meatloaf in the oven, or Twinkie in the oven, and at 350 for 30 minutes. And then I'm going to take 4 ounces of room temperature softened cream cheese and about 1/3 to 1/2 cup of some shredded cheddar. And to that, I'm going to add 1 egg. And the only reason I'm going to add the egg, actually, I'm not going to add an egg, I'm going to add half an egg. I'm doing that so that when we put this back in the oven, it helps the cream cheese and cheddar to bind and bake rather than just melt away. So just a half an egg and mix it all in. That cheddar will break up as you mix it, and it's going to fit through one of my favorite gadgets right here. This is about a $12 gadget at Walmart, and you can watch me awkwardly put it together here because I use it so seldom I forget about it. I actually use this most of the time for deviled eggs, since I don't decorate cakes, and that's what this is. It's a dessert decorator. I believe it's called a Wilton Dessert Decorator Plus, and as I said, it's like 12 bucks at Walmart. I've had this thing for years. No telling what it cost when I bought it. But I just filled up this tube with the softened cream cheese mixture. And here's the thing, don't put this back in the fridge while your meatloaf is cooking if you decide to do this, because it only takes about 10 minutes for that to become too hard to squeeze through the tube. Ask me how I know. Anyway, got my cream cheese mixture in the cake decorator, the dessert decorator, and it's all ready to be our Twinkie filling when it comes out of the oven after 30 minutes. And here it is. I'm going to take a bowl with a paper towel, a little something to grab that hot pan with, not awkward at all, and then drain the grease. Really need to drain this grease off for the last portion of this recipe. Now, next I took my dessert decorator, which I'm thinking about renaming the Curtis 2000, and just made a couple of stuffed holes with this cream cheese and cheddar mix. Sort of in the fashion like if you turned a Twinkie upside down. You know, back in the day when we ate Twinkies, not today. And I filled up as much as I could feel, you know, how it was filling up the tiny little meatloaf. I mean Twinkie. And once you've got however many you want to stuff it with, 3, 6, 8, depends on the size of your meatloaf. With this mixture, it's time to put it back in the oven, still at 350, for about 10 minutes to help that mixture get incorporated and the egg to do its thing to keep it from running all over the place. Turn it upside down over a plate, and basically you're done. But you may want to let it cool for just a couple of minutes before cutting into it so that that mixture doesn't run all over the place. And as one of my favorite sausage YouTubers would say over at Verst Circle, I would say now it is time to taste it. So I cut it up into several pieces, and you can see where the stuffing is inside, much like it might be in a Twinkie, although certainly not as abundant. What I learned from this is that it's just tough to really put a lot of it in there without it just coming out the top, because there just isn't a big void inside. But that being said, it was very light, it was soft, it was moist and delicious. The flavor was fantastic, and yes, I could taste the cheddar and the cream cheese. And as good as it was, and as good as it would have been just with some salt on it, one of my favorite things to do with any kind of meatloaf is add some spicy brown mustard. That's my favorite brand right there. So I put a little smudge on there, and it really did take it to the next level. It made it extra tasty. But could I have done this without the cream cheese and the cheddar cheese? Yes, I sure could have, because that meatloaf mix really was the key ingredient to the whole thing, not so much the filling. Good enough for some fancy hands, though. And what about our cute little meatballs? Well, as I said, I made a double batch, so I ended up having 5 meatballs of varying sizes, as you can see, left over. And all I did was I rolled them all in panko, pork panko, as I mentioned before, and then I put them in a preheated air fryer, which I had preheated to 400 degrees, and I cooked them for 22 minutes on this 400 degree setting. And when they were done, I actually thought about just leaving them just like they are. But, I had some of that cream cheese and cheddar cheese filling left over, and I thought, why not give it a try? So I stuck the Curtis 2000 in each meatball and used up some of the leftover filling that I had. And then I stuck it back in that microwave again at 400 degrees, but only for 5 minutes this time. And after I let them sit for a few minutes, I gave these an official test taste as well. And I gotta say, I was happier with these meatballs than I was the Twinkie, just because really of the addition of the pork panko and that crispy outer surface of the meatball. So again, not a huge amount of filling, but it added a little something. And it was actually quite soft and delicate with the, on the inside, and then the outside was crispy, and it really was delicious. I will definitely be making these again, and it doesn't matter whether or not I fill them with the cream cheese filling. The meatballs themselves were very tasty. So is it a recipe worth making? Yeah, if you feel like experimenting and you got some time in the kitchen, sure. Was it outstanding? Not from a special Twinkie-like point of view, but the meatloaf was delicious, and it was certainly worth making, and so are the meatballs, and they'll make a nice addition to our meal prep for taking to work. So thanks for hanging in there with me, and I appreciate you watching, and I hope to see you next time.